Hello, and thank you for joining us on the Freedom from the Struggle podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Corelli. I want to thank you so much for returning for season two. If you're new to this podcast, you can listen to season one on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or most places where you would find podcasts. I'd love for you to catch up with that, but season two is going to be a little different. We're going to begin to take calls and try to help those who are reaching out to us, whether it be through stories or actual deliverance ministry interventions. We're going to do what we can to help those who reach out to us. You can do that by reaching us at Anthony at thestruggleseries.com. Send us an email and we'll read through each and every one of those and we'll try to help you in any way we can. Now, this episode's going to run a little long, so I want to jump right to it. This is a very special episode for me because this episode is an interview with my sister, Ray. If you're familiar with my book series, in the first book, I tell several stories from our childhood of struggling with demonic attack within our household. So, Ray is not just here to corroborate some of my stories, but also kind of to try to help us understand how demons affect the family. And so, without any further ado, let's get to our interview with Ray. Okay. I'd like to welcome to the podcast one of my favorite people in the entire world, somebody who has been a vital part of my life and my journey to Christ, and that is my sister, Ray. How are you doing today, Ray?
I'm doing well. How are you, brother?
I'm doing pretty good. We're getting ready to launch season two here. And of course, you're going to be the first interview, which is so exciting for me because not only are you somebody who can speak on the paranormal and the familiar spirits that plagued our family, but it's just an honor to be able to corroborate some of the stories. I have a lot of people that read the books and have commented to me about, are those stories really true? Well, this might be the first time we can actually corroborate some of those stories and have, the proverbial witnesses to some of the things that I've written about. So I look forward to that. Are you ready to get into this?
Yep, pretty awesome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet. So what I want to do is start out with maybe the most important question because you and I have discussed, countless times about paranormal activity in our homes, and as we've looked back on our childhood with all the craziness that we endured or experienced, I don't think I've ever asked you what is the first time that you remember experiencing paranormal activity or seeing something or experiencing something that was just out of the norm?
Well, and like I'm the one that has the best memory of probably of the two of us. And I think and I'm not sure which episode it was that you talked about the incident. Well, your recollection of what happened, or your memory of what happened in the closet of our childhood, of that shared closet of our childhood home. That it was like a Jack and Jill closet, and I was probably 3 when that happened. If I look back at the timeline of when we lived there and when that would have occurred, I would have been about 3. And what I remember is that we had a little record player, like a childlike record player that maybe played like 45s or something, dating us to the 70s. And
Definitely.
we were listening. I don't know. I was listening. I don't remember exactly if you were in that side of the room or if you were in your side of the closet, which would have been your bedroom. But we were. I was listening to music, and then I don't remember the details of why we went into the closet. I do remember going into the closet with you and you holding my hand and the door shutting behind us. I do not remember you shutting the door, and it's not that it shut and I forgot that you shut it. No, I remember that we were already in the closet and it shut hard behind us. And then I remember it being dark, and I remember us walking for a very long time. And a very long time we were in that closet. And I remember crying. And I remember I wasn't scared until I knew that you were scared. And I remember that we just kept walking. And the only other thing I remember is when mom came and we were in trouble. And and I remember being punished. I remember mom spanking us, and we were in trouble. Um, I I know that that was scary, and I know that that was strange. And I mean, I remember that was the first memory I have of being very, very frightened and fearful. I don't. I mean, obviously, at that age, I didn't recognize that that was paranormal per se. Um, and just looking back after, of course, many other things that occurred, I recognized that that wasn't normal or natural. I had returned to our childhood home as an adult. And I don't know if I ever told you this, but it was empty. As people have lived in that house for many years now, but prior to that, there it was empty. And some friends of mine uh, and I went into the home when it was empty, and I went to look at that closet. And if you, this closet was so small, I mean, it is literally a very small closet. And I think in the pod episode that you discussed it, I can't remember, what your recollection of, maybe trying to guesstimate the size of it. It's maybe 4 feet uh, in length. Uh, and so the fact, I mean, even as small children, to be able to take a few steps to get from one door to the other, 4 feet, a few steps, but we were walking, and I really remember that, just walking and walking. And we didn't really talk about that until we were adults, but I always remembered that. I always remembered that throughout our childhood. So that's basically the first thing, the first memory of that,
You
those
know,
kind of differences.
and I appreciate you sharing that because what astonishes me is, how our memories work. And that's
Hmm.
why I think it's important, especially for, you know, people who struggle with paranormal when they're reaching out for help. There's always that deal where there's your version of the truth, there's somebody else's version of the truth, and whatever's in the middle is the truth. And so even now as we're talking, I do remember the closet being longer, but of course we were young
We
children.
were small. Hmm.
Yeah. And so going back and realizing that it was only 4 feet only really makes the story even creepier. And
Right.
what I want to do real quick is for those of you who haven't heard the previous episode, I just want to give a quick overview of what we're talking about. So my sister Ray and I, we lived in a house in a little town called Pueblo, Colorado. And this house was on Jackson Street. And I won't give the address because those poor people don't need you showing up to their house. But this was a tiny little house that my mother and stepfather, Shannon's biological father, lived in when we were very young. Um, and this house was full of paranormal activity. I can probably do 4 seasons of a podcast just dedicating each episode to 3 or 4 stories each. This house was so charged. And of course, as I always teach, houses aren't haunted, people are. But when I say the house was charged, it's because the season of our lives and the familial spirits of our lives were kind of running rampant. In this particular story, Ray and I decided to, and at least from my memory, it was kind of like a dare, probably more on my side because I was older, that we should go in the closet. and just go through the other side. So what, as Ray said, it's a Jack and Jill. So you open the door in our bedroom and would walk through the closet, and there was a door going into our parents' bedroom, and so it was like a shared closet between two rooms. Well, the reason this was scary, even in the daytime, is because throughout my childhood, most nights of my life, and when I say most, I would say 330 out of 365 nights of my life, that the closet door would open, a demon spirit, kind of a shadow figure that was comprised of like a static. It almost looked like when you leave your television on overnight back in the 70s and 80s, where it would go off and there would just be static, would come out of that closet and stand next to my bed. And so during the day, I was even scared to go in there because I knew that that's, at least at the time in my mind, where that demon resided. I realize now that it was probably a portal. Um, but at the time, I think I was trying to gear myself up to go into the closet in the day, maybe trying to resolve some of my fears. But as Ray and I walked into the closet, um, as she explains, and I don't remember this, the door closed behind us, but we just thought we would do our little dare and walk to the other side and come out of our parents' room. But that didn't happen that way. We were in that closet for a very long time. And, in our minds, it was probably minutes. But even if it was 30 or 40 seconds, as Ray just explained, this closet was so small that you couldn't get lost in there for a very long period of time. But I remember hearing laughter that wasn't ours. I remember the feeling of evil around us. And so, as I became afraid, as Ray just explained, she became afraid and we started to cry. And I want to kind of give a disclaimer here because our poor mother gets picked on a lot because, um, at the time she was the typical 70s mother, right? You disciplined your kids, and that's what she did because to her, we weren't kids afraid of some demon. We were just kids that got locked in the closet. And so, um, as we relive that experience, and Ray and I have talked about it on multiple occasions, it was disheartening, however, that we weren't believed. And it would probably be several dozen other times where things would happen and we weren't really believed. If you sat my mother down and talked to her now, she will believe everything because she has since kind of seen the light in terms of the demonic realm, but also in accepting Jesus into her life and kind of seeing the good versus evil battle that we talked about in a previous episode, in episode 1. So I want to kind of just say this to close this little rant, and then we'll get back to Ray here. But as Ray and I have, been people that have kind of experienced paranormal, participated in paranormal ghost hunting before it was called that, we've always believed that, I don't know if words could adequately describe this closet event. I don't know of a horror movie that has had something similar to that. I'm sure if we thought about it, we could. But to experience this and to know in your heart that this was not only paranormal, but terrifying and possibly to the point where demons were luring us in there, it's terrifying. It's a horror movie scene that you can put in any horror movie and enhance that movie. Wouldn't you agree?
I definitely would agree to that.
All right, so let's talk a little bit more about this house on Jackson. What are some of the other things you remember?
Well, I mean, going back to the fact that I was really young, I think we moved when I was 4. I remember that the basement was just a place of nothing but fear to me. I think at one point, because the bedrooms kind of got switched around, and one bedroom would be somebody's and then it would change to somebody else's. Our mom was known for rearranging and um, changing things around. But at one point, the basement wasn't finished, but there was one room that was finished, which was at one time our parents' bedroom. At one time, it was. I think they wanted it to be your room, but I think maybe you were not going to go down there, maybe out of fear. I don't really remember, but it was a playroom, I think. Or maybe it was storage that we had toys in. I don't really recall. But I did not like to play down there. But I remember there was toys, and mom was doing laundry down there, because I do know that the washer and dryer was down there, and she had me playing down there. And there was a doll I had called a Baby Alive doll. For 70s and 80s kids, they'll maybe remember the Baby Alive doll. You could feed it, and it would eat, and it would actually pee in a diaper, and it was a very lifelike doll. At any rate, the doll was playing, and I were playing in the doorway of the playroom, and I just, for some reason, just did not want to be down there. So I went up the stairs, and she was doing laundry and screamed for me to come back down. And I said I didn't want to, but I reluctantly went back down the stairs. And when I went back down, the doll wasn't where I left it. And I looked around, and I looked around, and I couldn't find it. And it was on there was a ledge in that room. And the ledge was too high for me to climb up onto. So I couldn't figure out how the doll got up on there. And mom was no longer down there doing laundry. So I couldn't figure out how the doll got onto the ledge. And all I remember is just being afraid and just running back up the stairs. And I never played with the doll again. And from what I remember, I never played with dolls really again after that. And I don't know if you remember this, but anytime I ever received a doll, a Barbie, anything after that, I never played with it. We used to pull their limbs apart and bury them and do anything other than I just didn't play with dolls. I think in my brain, I equated it that there was something wrong with the doll, that the doll was scary, that something was alive and scary with the doll. But now I realize that it was something else that was going on. And
You
I
know
never
what?
told that to anybody, I don't think.
Yeah, I do remember us speaking about dolls and you voicing to me, and we were young, but voicing to me your fear of them. I don't remember the specific Baby Alive story, although I do remember those creepy dolls anyway. Um, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know if my reservation about dolls comes from that or just from the fact that I've researched a lot of this. And in history, a lot of people don't realize, but dolls were actually made, at least rumor is, that they were made for people to put spirits in. And then somehow they became children's toys. Of course, people might dispute that a little bit, but I've read that on several occasions. So um, that basement was a very terrifying place, and I've spoke about it in one of my books, in the first book called The Struggle. And so, what we're going to do is read an excerpt from that story, and then we'll come back and kind of finish that up. So, let me jump to this excerpt, and then we'll come right back with our interview with Ray. The basement of the house on Jackson Street was partially finished. A bedroom had been built, but the rest of the basement was concrete. The goal was to eventually move Tony to the basement and give his baby sister Ray the room upstairs. Now, the basement bedroom was a toy room. His fear of the house prohibited him from being in the basement alone on most days. On this day, Jade was down in the basement doing laundry. Tony tagged along and was playing on the floor in the bedroom. He was feeling safe, and his playtime allowed him to relax and enjoy his toys. The basement was relatively dark, even with daylight peeking through the tiny windows. He felt the room get darker, and instantly he knew something was wrong. He could see into the section of the basement where the washer and dryer stood. His mother was gone. He had not noticed she had left him alone to play. Fearfully, he decided to make a break for the door and fly upstairs. As he took his first couple of steps towards the door, a black figure crept out of the shadows and quickly blocked the exit. Tony was trapped and had no options. Again, Tony's attempts to scream was hindered by the terror that coursed through his veins with as with previous episodes. He could not make out the features of this black figure, but he did notice that the creature was big enough to block the entire door. Now 7 years old, he had vowed to stop being a chicken, always afraid of something. Today he was failing as the tears streamed down his cheeks. He could only muster a whisper as he pleaded, "Leave me alone." The being backed the young child deeper inside the bedroom to the corner, showing no empathy. Tony closed his eyes and winced, not knowing what would come next. Then the monster began to speak. "Child, wherever you go, I will always be close by. Your God and your family cannot save you from me. I am always watching you. Your God has made you a special child. That is why I want to live inside of you. If you do not invite me in, I will hurt your family. I will hurt your baby sister."
So again, Ray, as you hear that excerpt and me telling my story about basically a demon trying to pin me in that room, these were those moments where I look back in my life and say, this is not a normal childhood thing. And I want to give a little disclaimer before we kind of move forward here a little bit. One of the things that drives me crazy in the world, and of course, this just simply comes from my experience, and I'm sure you would say the same, Ray, is when your parents don't believe you. And I think I want to challenge some parents a little bit, and people who are listening to this podcast, even if you're somebody who's younger, it might be a way for you to be able to communicate with your parents, because we were told, and this might be more 70s and 80s children than now, but we were told that it's just your imagination. And you might be able to argue an imaginary friend away, but when a child comes to you and has vivid recollections or vivid details of an encounter with the spirit, parents, I would challenge you to try to grasp how a child would know that level of information. And so let me give an example. I will listen to paranormal researchers or watch shows where paranormal investigators go into a house and they'll discuss issues with a family member, or maybe you'll watch a movie where a child comes to the parents and say, "There's somebody in my room." I wonder what happens in the mind of a parent where they say, "Well, it's just your imagination." Because with what I went through, and Ray, I'm sure you would say the same, with what we went through when my children came into my room in the middle of the night, I got up and went and prayed, because there was no doubt in my mind that there was something there to torment my children, or at least try to gain access into their lives. But we just didn't have that. And so, parents, I would challenge you to ask some questions of your children, but more importantly, to teach them that when they feel that fear, or they feel a presence, or they see something, to teach them to pray, because that's the only way that these things get dealt with. And the opposite is true when you tell your child to just go back to sleep. It's just in your imagination, because the fear didn't get resolved. And as I've taught frequently here, fear is what feeds these things. Negative emotions feed these things. So you send that child back to bed and the fear hasn't been resolved. Guess what? It's still there. It's still gaining access to your child's life. So, a little disclaimer there, just something to think about. Um, Ray, I want to ask you a question in terms of maybe any other things that happened at Jackson that stick out in your mind, or anything that you feel from that house that maybe followed us to the other house. But I'll let you kind of go from there.
I don't recall anything per se, as far as paranormal ish. Um, Definitely, as an adult, I recognize the oppression that was over us as a family. There was definitely, I guess, you know, the, you know, I don't know how to say this. I guess, between the dynamics between our parents, and there was fighting. There was, it always felt dark. It always, I mean, as a child, I felt this. I know, looking back, have an understanding, but as a child, I felt heaviness. I felt it was dark. I never felt like, what some would feel like, a loving, lighthearted, happy childhood home. That's not ever what I felt at that house in Jackson. I don't have memories of, skipping around the yard and picking flowers, and like a lot of laughter and joy. I don't have memories like that from that home. And granted, we weren't there a long time. I do have some memories, like I remember you and I, playing out, in the driveway, and, we had a dog, and, running around. Very few. Mostly it was heavy, it was dark. I remember a lot of just fighting. I remember our parents fighting and yelling, and I just remember feeling anxious and worried and scared. And at 3 and 4 years old, I just don't think that that's something that's, a child that small should ever have to be feeling. So I definitely realized that was being, you know the strings were being manipulated by something darker and something evil.
Definitely. And we're going to cover that a little towards the end of the interview because I have a specific place for that. But
Hmm.
I'm just glad you didn't tell the story about the time we were in the car and I flipped it
No,
into
I
neutral
won't
and drove it
I
into the
won't
street.
embarrass you. Yeah, I won't.
Well, it happens. It is what it is. So let's move a little bit to our house on Bronco.
Yes.
And what I remember of this time is that this was a new season for us in my memory because we were moving to a brand new house that was built for us. We had a new neighborhood. It was in the country, but it was still a neighborhood in and of itself. And we had new friends, new schools. And so I remember it, having the expectation that this was going to be like a brand new start, not just paranormally, but like you said, with our family, maybe some happier times. And I remember that darkness following us there, and experiencing paranormal activity relatively quickly. But and we'll get to the big story that we talk about in the book about the demon calling your name. But what are some preliminary stories or memories you have of when we first moved to that house?
I remember, and I think that I do have some happy memories in that house, because I think that it was a newer house. It was bigger. I think we had extended family came for holidays and those kind of things. So it was a little different there. However, like you said, the darkness did follow, and so the fighting continued. It did feel a lot like the other house. What I recognized as I got older is I had a lot of nightmares. Nightmares to the extent where, like, I had sleep paralysis. I would sleepwalk. I started sleepwalking as I got older. I had the kind of sleep paralysis where and this went on for many years, where I would, there would be a um, dark, it was a demon. I didn't realize at the time, but it was a tall, dark man with a top hat, a dark black top hat. And he was in my nightmare, and he was always in my nightmare. And I knew I was having a nightmare. And it was like being trapped, and I couldn't move, I couldn't make a sound, and I knew my parents were sleeping across the hall, and if I could just scream and wake them up, but I never could. That went on often for many, many years. Um, my dad also had weird night time episodes.
Sure.
Um, we could talk about his nighttime episodes of, waking up and doing odd behavior. Our TV, of course, it was an '80s box,
Oh,
uh,
yes.
big box TV, but it was downstairs, and all of our bedrooms were upstairs, and that TV would go on in the middle of the night, just to a static channel, and then the volume would start to raise higher and higher and higher and higher, um, until, it was scary. It was scary. And that happened on multiple nights. Um, Nobody ever explained. No, I don't ever remember my dad saying, "Oh, it's a faulty, ABC inside the television." I never got an explanation as to what was occurring with the TV.
Do you
Uh,
know, I remember a time, and I often laugh like how maybe stereotypical demons are, or how stereotypical like the paranormal world is, because we're talking the 80s at this point, and early 80s at that, maybe late
right.
70s, early 80s. Um, there was this television, and before that we had those big console TVs that you would lift up the top, and they had a record player in
All
there,
right.
and but then we had this modern TV that it had a remote control, and if you're listening, kids, we used to have to get up and turn the channel by hand, and
To the
now we
three
had
channels.
to the three channels we had, but we had a remote control, and this was a state of the art TV. Well, this TV would come on in the middle of the night, and the volume would elevate to a place where, even though we lived in the country and the houses weren't real close together, I guarantee you people outside that house could hear it.
Oh
It was
yeah,
so
it was so
loud.
loud.
But I remember a time where my stepfather, Ray's father, and I both went downstairs at the same time to go because it became a ritual. Somebody would have to get up and go turn it off. Well,
Hmm.
I remember meeting him at the bottom of the stairs, and he had already turned the TV off and was coming back up. And as we met at the bottom of the stairs, the TV came back on and the volume started to raise. So we both walked down the hall, turned to the left into the family room, through the kitchen, through the dining room area, and he unplugged the television. And as we turned to walk down the hall to go back upstairs, it came on again. And I remember at that time, because I was a little bit older at that time, turning into a teenager, I can remember saying, "This is evil." We didn't have the term paranormal I know there was people that were investigating the Amityville horror and that type of thing, but it wasn't commonplace. And so we didn't hear the term paranormal activity. We just knew it was weird and that it was evil because it was taunting us. Never in my mind did I think of it as a ghost. And I think maybe you would agree with this because the feeling of evil was so prevalent that it couldn't be an inhuman spirit. Do you remember that?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
All right. So I know we can sit here and shoot the breeze for hours, but I think it's important for us to get into the story that I've also spoken about in the struggle, and I revisit it back in my book, the Return, that is coming out in a handful of months when it gets through the publisher. But this is the story of you and I getting ready to leave, and me being ready first, and you hearing a voice, and me kind of making a decision that I often revisit with regret, definitely a lot of remorse, and definitely some shame. But let me paint the picture. So our family was one by this time where our parents were pretty much on the brink of divorce. They were basically separated, living in the same house, at least informally. And so they were gone on the weekends. And so once the weekend came, our mother would go here, father would go there, and sometimes we wouldn't see them for the whole weekend. And so we were kind of latchkey kids from an early age. So by the time you're teenagers, they just expected us to take care of ourselves. And so our younger brother David, and I'm going to touch on him in a little bit, but our younger brother David was off somewhere, I don't remember. And so Ray and I were getting ready to go out, and my friends showed up. We met at our house, and then we jumped in my vehicle, and we were getting ready to leave. And then Ray had an episode, and I want you to tell it as you remember it.
Okay. So, it was beginning to snow outside, and you had an I have the better memory, so know lots of details, and I'm going to give them all.
She
You had
definitely does, no doubt.
you had an old Ford Bronco, and it required it had to be warmed up. So you were out warming it up, and we had one of those curved driveways in the front that was right in front of the front door. Um, but you were out warming it up, and you actually had an event that you were going to, a wedding that you were going to, and your friends you weren't your friends weren't there. You were just warming it up. You were going to meet them. I was going somewhere. The house was completely dark at the main level. Our bedrooms are upstairs, or my bedroom is upstairs, and the laundry room is in the basement. My jeans were drying in the dryer in the basement, and I ran down to the basement to get my jeans. And as I come upstairs to the main level of the house, upon coming out of the basement door, I'm in the eating area of the kitchen. Through the kitchen is the dining room, and the dining room is connected to the front living room area. But it's all pitch black because we're not upstairs, we're not in that area of the house, so we just have those lights are off. And it's not late at night, but it's winter, so it's dark already. I'm guessing it's maybe 6 or 7 p.m. But in that dining room area that our mom is actually using as a home office, I hear my name being whispered, and not real loud, just, you know, regular whisper, Ray.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, just Ray. And immediately I think it's you, because that's something we did. We jumped out behind the, corner and scare each other or whatever. And I said out loud, knock it off. And but I'm kind of frozen because it's dark and I'm not sure. I can hear the Bronco outside running because it was loud. And I heard it again, but a little bit louder. Ray. And it didn't quite sound like your voice, but I wasn't sure because I mean it was a deeper voice. It wasn't like a female voice saying it. And so I said, "Anthony, stop it. It's not funny." And then I heard it again, but I heard it kind of almost, there was almost a chuckle in between. And then I heard it again, and I walked down the hallway towards the stairs to go upstairs. And at the end of that hallway is the front door, and there's a little window next to the front door that I could see out into the front yard. And I looked at your Bronco, and I could see you sitting in the driver's seat. And I still get goosebumps. I mean, I have goosebumps right now. And I could see you sitting in your Bronco. And I mean, I went cold and I ran up the stairs. Well, no, that's not what happened. I opened the door and it was
Yes.
cold outside. I opened the door and I started screaming at you. I started screaming at you and told you that that had happened and for you to come in because I wanted to get my stuff so that I could leave. Because I mean, we already had stuff going on there. I knew that it was something evil. I knew something was happening, but there was nobody else in the house. I needed to get my stuff and leave. And I wanted you to at least be with me while I got my stuff to leave. And you were like, I got to go. I got to get to this wedding. And you were kind of like real matter of fact, like, I don't know what to tell you. I got to go. And so I just grabbed my stuff. I don't even think I put my pants on. I had a sweatshirt. I had my pants. I grabbed my keys and I went to a friend who lived a couple of doors down. And I mean, in the cold, in the snow, I took off. I don't even remember if I locked the door. Of course, those times it didn't really matter too much, but you know, mid 80s, but I took off. Or no, that was already the early 90s because I was driving, but I took off and I still to this day know there was nobody else in that house. And one of the scariest things, I mean, I've seen and heard a lot of things, but nothing like that ever turned my blood so cold as that voice.
Yes, and I do remember, just for recollection, I do remember coming home and I cut my night early, and I'll talk about that in a second. But I do remember coming home and the door being unlocked. It was closed, but it was unlocked. And because the house was still lit up, because I would imagine you left whatever lights were
Oh,
on.
I turned every light in on the way
Yeah.
around.
But the house was open. And so there was that moment of, is somebody home, calling out for people, and then wondering, had somebody broken in, that type of thing. But we'll cover that more in a second. What I want to do here, and I feel like of course, your memory has always been better. I feel like I should have consulted you before I wrote my book because well, how I remember that, at least the unimportant parts anyway, is different. But I have no doubt that you were right. But I do remember leaving and feeling a big sense of regret because I had endured this stuff since childhood. And the thought that I left my younger sister there to deal with that it's inexcusable, but more importantly, I've revisited it in my mind, and I know it's because I was in that season of life where I was tired of it. I was tired of the, not just the paranormal activity, but just the oppressive nature of our home. And so I think in my honesty, it was like she's going to have to deal with this on her own, not only because I had somewhere to be, which I think was part of it, but I think it was also like, I don't want to deal with this anymore. And that wasn't fair. And so this will be my public apology. I've apologized to you in person, but this is my public apology because I'm always preaching that you should be believed, even earlier in this podcast, saying parents, you should believe your children. Well, family members, you should always believe each other. There's no history of mental illness in our family. There's no events that would have occurred that I would have thought Ray was making this up for attention. We were getting ready to go out and do our thing. We were teenagers. So there has to be a time and a place where we look back and say, this is a pivotal moment in my life. And this is a pivotal moment in my life because I returned back to the home, cut my night short, and experienced some of the most terrifying paranormal activity of my lifetime. And I say that knowing that I have gone to people's homes and administered deliverance ministry to people that were severely possessed. But I felt that this night of my life, I failed a test by not protecting my sister and opened a door with my apathy and my frustration to a demon basically making a play for me in that moment. And thank God I was able to pray. I had found, my faith. I had accepted Jesus into my life at that time. And so I had enough knowledge to know that all I can do was pray. And what happened when I got home, and I'm sure Ray has heard me tell this and also read it in the book, I flipped the TV on and watched a commercial popped up on the TV where there was a phone. It was a red telephone, like the old school little box with the receiver that fit on the top. It looked like ears almost. And it was sitting on a little stand and there was flames all around in the room. So it was like that time in the 80s where I was listening to Headbangers Ball. And so I thought it was like a commercial for maybe some new band's album, because a lot of the bands then were, at least pretending to be demonic. But the phone was ringing, and then the voice on the TV said, "Pick up the phone, Anthony. Pick up the phone." And I paused because I was trying to distinguish, how did they know my name is Anthony? Or is somebody going to come onto the TV whose name is Anthony and pick up the phone? But when that voice said, "Pick up the phone, Anthony, pick up the phone," our home telephone rang. And at the time, we had cordless phones in the house, but we still had the phone that was in the kitchen with that long spiral cord that could go from the dining room to the living room to the kitchen to the family room. It was huge. And that's the only phone that I saw. So when I walked over and picked it up, a demon began to converse with me and the house went crazy. Cupboard doors slamming open and closed. All the doors in the house were slamming open and closed. And keep in mind, I had thought that there was a possibility that somebody had been in the house because the front door was unlocked. And so I had searched the house from top to bottom to see if Ray was home or if David was home or if somebody else was home, and there wasn't. So I knew there was nobody in that house. And so that was a pivotal moment in my life because that's when I realized that I was probably meant or gifted to deal with this paranormal stuff. And we can save that for other podcasts at other times. But in those moments, feeling that, how these demons work and what they're trying to do with our family was evident. So what I want to do, Ray, is kind of maybe ask you a little bit, and I don't know how much you've thought of this, but how do you think, let me rephrase that. How much do you think these familiar spirits that were involved in our family affected our home life, what our parents were going through, what we were going through? Kind of give me your theology.
Well, and like I said before, I mean, in retrospect, I realize how greatly they were affecting everything. They affected choices we were making. you know, school with friends, you know, uh, in my life for sure. I was a good student. I had good grades. You know, you could say I am very smart. However, I got to a period in my life where, I was definitely experiencing, what many of us who have been educated in, psychology based, professions would say trauma, where living through these kind of experiences is traumatic for an adult, much less a child. So when you're experiencing these kinds of events, you're definitely it's going to come out in behaviors, whatever. So whether you're an adolescent who's drinking alcohol, um, to excess, binge drinking or whatever at parties, that kind of thing, reckless behavior, um, those kind of things, hanging out with kids that are doing things that they shouldn't be doing, getting in trouble, getting suspended, fighting. I was definitely a girl that wasn't a troublemaker, but I was definitely going to be the one that if you were picking on somebody, I would be the one that would punch you for picking on that person. Um, you know, I,
She's not lying, folks. Trust me. One of
yeah,
the
I
toughest
mean,
people you'll ever meet.
yeah, but thank God for Jesus, who's definitely given me some, I definitely have a kinder, more peaceful disposition now. Or at least I pray through most things. And so, that kind of thing. And also it was definitely hard, going, I was kicked out of school. I couldn't, manage my emotions, to be dealing with the stuff at home and then sitting through, 7, 8 classes at high school and do all of these things. And it was overwhelming and too much at times. And then, you know all of those things, and then also, watching your parents go through those kind of things, and then how do you develop your own relationships when you don't even you never had anybody show you, and all of those kind of things. It affected everything. It affected every single aspect. And because like you said, the devil wants to, destroy everything. He wants to steal everything. And that's what was happening. It was definitely what was happening. He stole from us our childhood. He destroyed, he destroyed my self-esteem, my ability to be able to manage my emotions, and my ability to maintain relationships with people, or that I thought I could do certain things. And he wanted to kill who God intended me to be, the person that God intended me to be. So he was basically, the devil was basically succeeding, until basically we met Jesus. So
I would agree with that. And I wanted to add this into this interview because I not only wanted to say it, but I wanted to kind of have your thoughts, feelings, and maybe backing on this. And I had written this into our little itinerary here today. Um, and I want this interview to be the first interview of season 2 and the first interview of this podcast period, because many people, when they watch a horror movie or they hear of exorcisms or deliverance ministry, they picture in their minds this, vile demonic reaction where the demons have infiltrated a person and they're screaming and yelling and speaking in different languages and vomiting. And those things occur, but that's really not the norm in terms of demonic attack. demonic attack, I think, is very easily exhibited in our family. It singled us out individually. It found our weaknesses individually. You mentioned my stepfather, your father, who would have these nightly episodes. He was demonized. We
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't have known what to call it, but he was tormented. And finding out later in life the things he endured as a child, a lot of things made sense. There was things in the 70s that were very occultish that our parents had in our home. I can
Mm-hmm.
remember idols and statues, things that he was into. There was, of course, substance use, which was, basically the norm in the 70s. But there was individual attacks on each and every one of us. And I mentioned earlier that I wanted to bring our younger brother David into the picture because I believe in my heart of hearts, the person who suffered the most from these demonic attacks was the person that we kind of didn't really think was experiencing it the most. And I've talked to him, very recently, as a matter of fact, and I actually had no idea that he had suffered so much paranormal activity because you'll remember that he was very isolated. He was kind of his own kid. And
Right.
so he did a lot of things on his own, but I didn't realize, and I'm very regretful because I was just caught up in my own mess, but he suffered a lot of visual, auditory, tangible paranormal activity. But more importantly, his life was a little rougher than ours.
Right.
He struggled a lot with different things in his life. And even as somebody who grew up and investigated, paranormal in terms of understanding it more and then going to Bible college and becoming a minister, I still didn't put two and two together until later in life that he was basically in attack mode the whole time. His whole life was scrambling to get out from under these familial spirits. And he's doing so good now. He hasn't always, he's off and on like the rest of us have, but he's
Right.
doing really well now because he's finally grasped the true concept of the love and grace of Jesus Christ and has embraced that and has come so far. But these demons, folks, as you're listening to this is how they attack a family. The possession and the deliverance ministry stuff comes and goes in terms of watching it on a TV. It gets minimized now. Paranormal activity is a lot more glamorized than it should be, but this might be what your family looks like. These might be what you would consider preliminary stages of a demonic attack, but in reality, the demons have their hooks in you and your family. You have
Mm-hmm.
one child that is experiencing this and another child that is experiencing that. And of course, teenagers are teenagers, right? But that becomes an excuse that parents or adults will use to justify a lot of behaviors. But when you've seen personality changes in a child, when you see them go from, a happy, loving kid to a very dark, kind of distant kid, I would say that 99.99 times out of 100, they're under demonic attack. They're oppressed. There's a demon attached to them. And most of the time, these are what I call familiar spirits or familial spirits that have been studying your family for decades. Have you ever thought, and I'm not speaking to Ray here, I'm speaking to you, have you ever thought why certain patterns continue in a family? Maybe abuse of some type, sexual abuse, violence, why these things perpetuate generation after generation? Because let's take, for example, domestic violence. You have these children that will watch domestic violence and they will say to themselves, when we get older, we'll never do this. Yet they get older and the cycle continues, what psychology calls a cycle. But in reality, what it is familial spirits that have been tearing apart a family for generations, for decades, for centuries. And how you break those bonds is by understanding exactly what Ray was saying, how you look at the individual family members, and as she broke apart her life and the things that she endured, it's by recognizing it for what it is. It's not just a teenager acting out. That may be the case in some events, but when you see a drastic change in somebody, it's good to take a look at that person and then look at the family system in and of itself, because I'm going to make a bold statement. Every person has a demon gunning for them, and every family has demons gunning for the family. They're trying to break apart marriages. They're trying to alienate certain children and create diversions by one person's behavior, and then that person becoming a scapegoat so the family can avoid all of their behaviors, and a family will be torn apart. And this is the demonic attacks that, if people would call somebody like me in at that moment, we could avoid getting to the places where we are bringing a team of people to pray demons out of somebody. We could avoid that, getting to that point, because I would challenge you, for every person that a deliverance minister has delivered through prayers and through introducing them to Jesus, there's dozens of people that committed suicide or homicide or destroyed their lives, and then were thrown away by society, either in a prison or a mental institution, because people don't understand the spiritual realm and spiritual warfare. So, Ray, I want to kind of ask you from there and kind of wrap this up. So let's kind of get to this last point. We also are at fault here because your older brother, the nut job that he is, introduced you and your younger friends, who were younger than me, to going out to these quote unquote haunted places and chasing spirits. Do you remember some of those times and the places we used to go to?
Oh, most definitely. And I don't, and I don't like, I don't look back and say, you're a nut job or fault you or am, in any way mad mad at you. I mean, those are actually some of the funnest times and funnest memories. Although maybe a little twisted to some people, but and especially to some Christians might look at us and say, what in the world were you guys doing? However, we told scary stories, and that were had to do with certain locations, maybe an old abandoned church that was tied to activity, or stories of some scary activities that were being practiced there, or a death, or so on and so forth. There was an old mental institution, we're in our local town where we grew up, and that place ended up, because you don't institutionalize people anymore, so that place became abandoned, and then it became somewhere where devil worshippers would go, and people would do crazy things there. And of course, we would just go there at night in the dark for fun, just to scare each other, and go to old cemeteries, and hide out and scare each other. I mean, the list goes on and on. However, there were lots of times we would go, and we would all end up scared, because there were things that would happen that weren't a part of your plan. And there would we went to an old cemetery that was way out west of town, on a old cliff. I don't even know that people get buried there anymore. It was like an old kind of pioneerish type cemetery, and we were out there to get for you and your friends to scare me and my friends. And then I think the battery died in the old Bronco. And then as we finally jumped the Bronco and we were getting ready to leave, we saw a guy crouched down, probably about I don't know, 7, 8 feet away from the Bronco, just crouched down in the dark looking at us. And he wasn't a part of our group. He wasn't a part of your friends. He wasn't a part of our, I mean, we never even got out of the car. So I don't know who that guy was, but that was scary. And I think you had a gun. So we were scared. We did those things and we did them on purpose for whatever reason. But, you know, I don't, even now, I don't, I mean, we were afraid, but it was almost kind of like adrenaline. It was almost like, people that go skydiving and stuff like that. We were experiencing real stuff and we had no control over it. So I don't know if we did that because we had control over it. I don't know. I still kind of don't know why we did those things.
You know,
But
I've never thought of it that way, but I would say that I agree with that. And more importantly, we were desensitized to the paranormal.
yeah,
So
I agree.
so although we were going out to scary places, the things that we experienced sometimes, at least most of the time, didn't hold a candle to the things we actually had going on at home.
Right,
What
right.
I want to do is so the place she's talking about is a place called Swallow Cemetery out west of Pueblo West, Colorado, um, in between the city of Pueblo and Canyon City, and it's since developed. It's a different place than it was then, but it was a pretty isolated cemetery out in the middle of nowhere. And the rumor is that once upon a time, most of the graves were down lower, down by the reservoir. But when the flood happened in Pueblo, I think in the 20s, they moved. They supposedly moved the bodies up to the top of this hill or this cliff, but rumor is that maybe just the headstones got moved, and there wasn't very many new gravestones even then in the 80s. So I doubt people had been buried there for years and years. But um, we did experience quite a bit of paranormal activity out there. And in my latest book, The Return, which is still at the publisher, I'm going to read to you a little excerpt of that, because what it does is it explains the event that Ray is talking about. And of course, I used that story and embellished it a little bit to make the book a book. But when you read in this story of The Return, the first part of the book, I go back and revisit some of the old quote unquote haunts that we used to visit in order to make the story for The Return. And most of the stories in the first 5 chapters in the book are true, or at least the bulk of them are true, as much as I could, leading them into the story. And so I'm going to read a little bit about seeing that shadow figure or that guy sitting next to the car.
The group climbed out of the vehicles. Tony was already out of the truck and headed for the gate. He did not want his sister or any of the other girls out in the cemetery if someone was hiding in the shed. When he got to the door, he could see that it was slightly ajar. The moonlight was bright enough to see the detail of the wood in the handle. Tony assumed the shed was old. It always reminded him of an old outhouse in a Western movie. He was too angry to be scared as he opened the door quickly. There was no one there. Only a few gardening tools hung up in the tiny little shed. It was easy to see there was nowhere to hide. Whatever had gone into the shed was not human. As he stood there staring into the empty little building, the group walked up behind him. He said, "We have to get out of here. It is not safe." The girls were on edge and seemed interested in what he had to say. The boy said something about his manhood and escorted the girls to the back of the cemetery. Joey said, "That was a good touch. They are scared out of their minds." Before Tony could speak, Joey ran off to catch up to the group. Tony held back because he wanted a wider view of the group in case someone or something was trying to hide or join the crowd. Soon the boys came running with the girls in tow. Tony did not want to fulfill his duty of hanging back and scaring them, but he decided to do it anyway. If it meant that the night would come to an end, he could do it. He let them all run past him and then hid. He saw Joey's truck pull away. He hid in the shadows and slowly moved towards the van. As he drew closer, he heard Dave screaming, "The car won't start. I don't know what to do." That was Anthony's cue. He ran at the van, slamming his body into the side. The girls all screamed in unison. He had his hood pulled down tight so they couldn't see his face. He made his way to the passenger front door. Ryan acted like he was trying to lock the door. The screaming was accompanied by all the girls climbing on top of each other in fear. When Anthony opened the door, he couldn't help but laugh. When his body was leaning in the van, he removed his hood. The screaming changed from fear driven screams to angry screams. The boys laughed as the girls took a few seconds to calm down. Once they caught their breath, even the girls had to laugh. Tony said, "You said you wanted to be scared. Well, be careful what you ask for." He jumped in the van as they all relived the last 2 minutes of their lives.
Okay, so as you hear in the story, and I'm glad that Ray was able to corroborate that we did go visit this place. There was a person or an entity that was standing just a few feet from the vehicle, and I would say, are pretty sure that it was a person, but if it was a spirit, we were terrified. And if it was a person, what the heck were they doing out there in the middle of the night in a
Right.
place so far removed from any life? They were up to no good. And so there's that season of our lives where we did this for fun, but we were getting in over our heads. And as Ray said, I had a weapon. Back in those days, you can drive to high school with a shotgun and a rifle on your gun rack of your truck, and nobody said anything because it was a different time and place. So I could have protected us maybe from a person, but not from a spirit. But when I look back, I see that we were getting in over our heads. And it was a season of life where we had to kind of make some decisions on who we were going to be. And I would say that Ray and I both, fortunately, were able to find, some peace through our relationship with Jesus Christ. So, Ray, I'm gonna kind of wrap this up with this. I think that as people listen, they hear these stories. Maybe this sounds a lot like their family, or a lot like their childhood, or even a lot like what they're going through now. But I want to say that this is where things can change. This is where all the paranormal activity, the oppression, the depression, the attack that you're feeling, there's relief in Jesus Christ. And so, can you tell us a little bit about how your relationship with Jesus has changed your life?
My relationship with Jesus is everything. So it is going from darkness into the light. There is only hopelessness without Jesus. So with Jesus, you are saved. You're saved. When it went from one life of despair and fear to the complete opposite. So when you have something oppressing you and keeping you down, and you've talked in I think in your podcast about depression. When you have Jesus, you're freed from all that. You're saved from all of that. Not that you don't experience any of those things anymore. You just have the go-to. So my life went from it's like a 180. So when you have nothing to go to, that's where the demonic has a foothold. You don't have the go-to. That demon's got that door. That door is open. That foothold is there for that demon to take root, build roots, and start to build build up strength in your life. But when you have the Lord there to fill in the gaps where there's no room for darkness anymore. And that's the only way I could put it, because I don't feel that sense of darkness and heaviness anymore. um, there's not, there's no longer fighting and sadness and despair, and I don't have night terrors. When I do, and but believe me, when you have Jesus in your life, those demons do try to come. And but when I do have them try to, infiltrate my dreams, all I have to do is say Jesus, and I'm freed from those dreams. I don't have those night terrors where I'm paralyzed at night anymore. And I think you were saying earlier about how the demons, they try, they infiltrate people's lives. But the thing is that when you have Jesus in your life, that you have a purpose, and there is a purpose to honor and glorify the kingdom of God. And that is why these demons want to attach to your life. That's why they want to destroy your life. That's why they want to destroy your family. That's why they want to destroy your marriage. And I think that's why people don't understand what the reasoning is behind all of that. That's because you're important. You're important and you're valued to God. And
Amen.
so, if you're too worried within yourself as to why this is happening to you, it's because you're so loved. You think you're insignificant, but you're not. You're valued and important to God and to his kingdom. And so just turn to him, just know that you're loved and valued by him, and your whole life just changes everything.
I don't think I could have said that better myself. And I think as we wrap this interview, I would just add to that if you're listening to this and maybe you can get caught up in the stories, or maybe you're just listening to two siblings who've experienced something, but I want you to really fully grasp our family was a mess. I don't blame anybody. I have no animosity towards my parents or anything like that, but it was a mess. And I actually look back and can see the demonic workings that were so dedicated. The demons were so dedicated to destroying all of us individually. And I think that there comes a time and a place where we all have to recognize, just like Ray said, you are valuable. That's why the demons are coming for you.
Yep.
If you were insignificant or irrelevant, they wouldn't waste their time. There's a grand scheme to destroy you from the inside out and from the outside in, because you are valuable, because you are loved, because God smiles when he thinks of you. He doesn't hate you. He's not mad at you. He wants to be in relationship with you. And the demons and Satan himself hate that. They hate that he loves you so much. They hate that he forgives you so much. They hate that he created a way to overlook or to pay the price for all the things you've done. And so as you look at your family or your situation, or why you're in a place where you are at in terms of depression, guilt, shame, anxiety, oppression, familial strife, those things that are plaguing your life, remember that here's two people that suffered some of the worst paranormal activity that you can wrap your head around. We don't have enough time in this podcast to tell 1,000 stories, but we overcame not by what we did, or not by educating ourselves or finding the right incantations to spout out. We came to this place of peace and healing and forgiveness and overcoming of these demonic attacks by simply giving our lives to Jesus. And so if this is somebody that has inspired you by listening to Ray's story, this story, as simple as it sounds, is the way. You give your life to Jesus and everything changes. Maybe not overnight, but you will be amazed at how light pushes out all darkness. Darkness cannot exist where the light is. And so that's what we want to communicate here. And so we'll kind of wrap up this podcast in a minute, but I want to just take the time to thank Ray for giving up her Saturday afternoon. This isn't going to air on a Saturday, but that's when we're recording. So thanks for giving up your Saturday afternoon. And is there anything you want to say before we let you go?
No, I appreciate you having me. And I hope, even if there's just one person, just one single listener that hears this and thinks, my story is small. It's just one maybe isolated little incident that's occurring. It's not a big deal. I don't have some elaborate paranormal story. Um, no, I mean, even if you just need somebody that just needs to pray for you, Anthony will pray for you. I'll pray for you. It's not insignificant. It just takes one little thing. I know Anthony's talked about it, but it just takes one little door to open. And before you know it, it can turn into something big. But, it's important to know that there are people that believe you. And, and like I've said it, and I'll say it again, every person is important and valuable and loved. And there are many of us here that care, and we're here rooting for you and want to pray for you and want to love you. So that's all I have to say. I'm glad you had me today.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And tell the dogs I said hi. Ray has about 100 dogs. I know you heard them in the background a little bit, but I miss them. They probably heard my voice. So thanks a lot for joining us, Ray, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay, talk later.
Words can't express how big of an honor it is to have Ray on the program today. As you can tell, she's a very intelligent woman, but more importantly, she's overcome so much in her life and has become this amazing spiritual woman. And so it's just beautiful to see what God has done with her life. And I'm excited to see what he's going to do with her life in the future. And I wanted to kind of conclude this episode with a little story, one that kind of concludes our childhood as we became adults. We were often children that would go out and do ghost hunting. We would go out to different haunted places in our lives, as we spoke about in the interview. But there were often times where spiritual things would follow us home, and we would be left alone a lot of the times. And so I can remember, the demons that were trying to destroy us really would cause different fights in the house between us siblings, between our parents. But I remember a time when my sister and I were just kind of sitting around on the couch, and this won't be a spiritual story or a scary story like some of the ones in the podcast. It's actually something beautiful. And I just remember us kind of having that conversation where we commit our lives to doing something different. Um, our parents had gotten divorced at this time. I was getting ready to go out on my own, and she was still in the home. But we just discussed how we were going to be something different, and we were going to do something different with our lives, that the chaos that we lived in was not going to be continued through us. And unfortunately, for the both of us, actually for all of us, my brother as well, we have found ourselves at times caught up in the chaos that, family cycles repeat, correct? But I still remember her committing to that and I committing to that. And although it took us decades, I think we've arrived. And it's only because we have always had that belief that God was in control. And through the mistakes we made, through the curses of our family, we've always been people that never lost hope or never lost faith because we believe in scripture. We believe that all things are possible through Christ Jesus. And so to watch us all now later in life doing well, it's just a blessing to me. And I want to tell you that story because if you're somebody who's thinking about getting a hold of us for some help, I don't want to set any illusions. This is a battle you're fighting, and it's not always a simple fix. It's not like the movies where we say some prayers over you and you're better and life is perfect from here on out. What deliverance ministry is about canceling the contracts, breaking the ties, the bonds that demons have on your life. And then it's about closing all the doors that you've left open and establishing a life with Jesus that allows him to build you back up into a new creation. And he will do that through your faith and through your commitment with him. But building a relationship with him takes time. And the demons will often come back and try to test the waters to see where you're at. And they're always going to challenge you. But when you have Jesus in your corner, even though those challenges come and go, and even though life doesn't always work out perfectly, you'll just have more tools and skills, not from a psychological point of view alone, but from a spiritual point of view. You'll know more scriptures, you'll hear God's voice clearer, you'll have ridden out several storms with God and know how he responds and how he always saves and always perseveres. And so as we close today, I just want to say a little prayer for us. God, I know that people are listening to this and they have their own struggles, their own demonic attacks, their own curses that they fight with, familial spirits that are constantly trying to bring up the past and to repeat cycles in our lives. But Jesus, we've bought into the lie that the world tells us that you're not real or you're not strong or you're not powerful. But that's a lie because you are the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. You've already defeated the enemy that comes after us. And so, God, just give us a reminder that you are the God that saves us, not just on the day of our salvation, but saves us every day from ourselves, from the evil that surrounds us. God, you even taught us to pray in the Lord's Prayer, deliver us from evil. And so, God, we pray that prayer for us today. Deliver us from the evil that is constantly seeking to destroy us. God, I pray for the people that are hurting, that need help. I pray that you would prompt them to find that help, whether it be through this podcast or through a local church or a family member, just somebody who can pray with them and lead them back to you. God, we love you and we trust you and we thank you for being a God that isn't above us, that isn't better than us, but a God that, although you are so perfect and so amazing that you come to earth through your son and dwell with us, struggle with us, suffer with us. There's no other God that I would rather serve than a God that knows where I've been and knows what I struggle with, knows what I've done and loves me anyway. Thank you, God, for being that God. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Don't forget, we're always looking to grow the podcast and we're always looking to grow some prayer warriors for the people that call into this podcast. So if you could, please don't forget to push the podcast, tell your friends about it, click like, subscribe, hit the thumbs up, hit the bells, make sure you get your subscription notices when anytime new episodes come out. Just a reminder to listen. Give us some reviews if you don't mind. Some great reviews would help us out to reach more people. And we also have a Patreon campaign for those of you last season, excuse me, that were uh, able to help us. You realize that at the $2 level, you become a prayer warrior with us. You help us financially to keep the podcast on the air. We will give you a shout out for your support. And at the $5 level, you get access to the 2 bonus episodes that we put out every month. Right now, what we're doing is we're going over very famous paranormal cases, kind of breaking them down and understanding how deliverance ministry might have been a better intervention than what the people sought out. So if you can help us out with that, that's the $5 level on Patreon. You can reach us at Patreon slash freedom from the struggle. Find us there and sign up if you can. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next Wednesday night. Many blessings.